Usually when you picture a high-stakes diplomatic summit between two global superpowers, there's this massive expectation of intense choreography.
Oh, absolutely. Almost theatrical.
Right. Every single handshake is timed.
Yeah.
Every statement has been vetted by, layers of protocol officers.
The messaging is supposed to be tighter than a bank vault.
Yeah. But then you look at what we're exploring today, and suddenly that pristine choreography just completely falls apart. On live television, no less.
It really does.
So we're looking at a geopolitical landscape right now that is incredibly volatile. And today we're going to unpack for you exactly what happens when that volatility breaches the walls of the Oval Office. So welcome. It's really great to have you with us.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
Today's exploration involves a really fascinating stack of materials we've gathered for you. I'm talking detailed financial analyses, diplomatic cables, international news coverage, Policy Institute papers.
It's a huge stack.
It is. And our mission today is to decode the profound transformation that's currently happening in Japan right now, under its first female prime minister, Takaichi.
And crucially, we want to look at how a pretty startling, completely unscripted moment she experienced alongside U.S. President Donald Trump exposes the fragile tectonic plates of global geopolitics.
Right. And I should say right up front for you listening, we are looking at some incredibly charged geopolitical and military reports today.
Very charged.
Yeah, involving U.S. foreign policy, military actions in the Middle East, Japanese nationalist politics. And our job here is absolutely not to pick a side.
No, not at all.
We're not endorsing any political figures or telling you who the, quote-unquote good guys are in these military actions. Our goal is strictly to decode the strategy in these documents, impartially convey the ideas as they're presented so you can see the whole chessboard clearly.
Because the board is moving fast. I mean, the events we're analyzing offer basically a masterclass in how domestic survival and foreign policy are colliding right now.
Exactly. So let's unpack the core contradiction here, because the juxtaposition is wild.
It really is.
On one hand, you have this monumental $40 billion international energy deal being brokered between the U.S. and Japan.
Right. Massive money.
And on the other hand, sitting right next to it, you have this incredibly awkward diplomatic faux pas involving World War II history. And it plays out right in front of the White House press corps.
Yeah.
So how are these two seemingly disconnected events actually symptoms of the exact same global crisis? To answer that, I think we have to set the scene.
Yeah, let's set the scene. So the setting is the Oval Office. Prime Minister Takaichi has traveled to Washington to meet with President Trump.
Right.
The press pool is gathered. But the context hanging over the entire room, the real elephant in the room, is the recent U.S. military strike on Iran.
Right. Operation Epic Fury.
Exactly. Operation Epic Fury. And a Japanese journalist asks President Trump a very pointed, very valid question.
Yeah, they ask why U.S. allies, including Japan, were kept completely in the dark about these strikes before they happened.
And Trump's response, it starts off focusing heavily on the tactical necessity of secrecy. He defends the lack of communication by stating the military needed the element of surprise.
Sure, which makes sense militarily.
Right. But then he turns the rhetoric in a direction literally no one anticipated.
Yeah.
He says, and I quote, "Who knows better about surprise than Japan?" Okay. Why didn't you tell me about Pearl Harbor?
Wow.
Yeah.
When you read the firsthand accounts from the reporters in the room, the atmosphere just completely shattered.
Totally shattered.
At first, there was some scattered laughter from a few people, probably assuming it was just a bizarre attempt at a joke. But that laughter abruptly died away.
Because it wasn't landing as a joke?
No.
No.
The reporters noted that Takaichi visibly shifted in her chair. She appeared to hold back a heavy sigh, her eyes widened, and there was an audible groan from the press corps.
It was a moment of severe diplomatic whiplash. I mean, the White House later attempted to smooth the whole thing over.
Right, with a social media post.
Yeah, they posted a photo of the two leaders giving a thumbs up. But the damage of that unscripted moment was already radiating through all the international news networks.
It makes me think of a high-stakes corporate merger. Picture two CEOs sitting at a table in front of the financial press. One CEO makes a deeply offensive personal joke about the other CEO's family history.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
And the second CEO just has to sit there, swallow the humiliation, and force a smile.
Because they have to.
Right. Because their company so desperately needs the capital from the merger to survive that they literally cannot afford to walk away from the table.
Exactly.
Which leads me to the big question for you. Why didn't Takaichi push back? Why endure that level of public humiliation on camera without saying a single word?
Because pushing back in that specific moment, disgracing Trump publicly in his own Oval Office, it would carry an immense strategic risk for Japan. It would risk triggering a retaliatory cycle from a president known for demanding personal loyalty. And that could potentially destroy a bilateral relationship that Japan relies on for its very physical survival.
So she needs the American alliance far more than she needs to win a rhetorical sparring match on television.
Absolutely. And, to be fair to the strategic reality of Operation Epic Fury, we have to understand the military context of Trump's statement here.
Right. What were they actually trying to do?
Well, the administration's defense, as outlined in the military analyses we have, is that the United States and Israel were aiming to neutralize Iran's ballistic missile stocks and key leadership.
Okay.
Achieving a strike of that magnitude required absolute airtight secrecy.
Right, because if you leak even a hint of it to an allied government, the chances of that information hitting a foreign intelligence desk or a satellite monitoring station skyrocket.
Exactly, and the targets scatter. So, from the U.S. perspective, Trump views his lack of communication with allies not as a slight against them, but as a rigid operational necessity, one that ultimately ensured the success of the mission and saved the lives of the pilots involved.
Okay, so Takaichi's silence in the Oval Office wasn't weakness at all. It was ironclad discipline.
It was incredibly calculated.
But to truly grasp why she needs this American alliance so desperately enough to endure that kind of public moment, we have to look at the radical transformation she's orchestrating back home in Tokyo.
Yes. To understand the prime minister's restraint abroad, we have to examine the doctrine she's building at home. So Sanae Takaichi is a protege of the late Shinzo Abe.
Right.
She's stepped into leadership to usher in what analysts in these papers are calling a new era of strategic conservatism.
And she is a fascinating figure just on a personal political level. There's a quote from her in the sources that I think perfectly encapsulates her approach. She stated, "I am a politician before I am a woman."
That phrasing is very deliberate. She actively avoids gender-based identification in her politics. Furthermore, she actually opposes several liberal gender equality reforms.
Like what?
Well, for instance, she has strongly stood against legal changes that would allow married couples to keep separate surnames.
Wait, hold on. Let me make sure I have this right.
Right.
The first female prime minister in the history of Japan is actively blocking women from keeping their maiden names.
Yes.
Why would she do that?
Because in Japan, the single-family surname is deeply tied to the koseki. That's the traditional family registry system.
Okay.
So for traditional conservatives like Takaichi, the unified family name is seen as the foundational building block of social cohesion. To allow separate surnames is viewed by her faction as fracturing the traditional Japanese family structure.
Interesting.
She strongly prefers to frame her administration around meritocracy rather than what she views as disruptive social reform.
It's a really striking paradox. I mean, she's achieved this historic glass ceiling shattering milestone, yet her political platform essentially upholds and defends the traditional patriarchal norms of Japanese society.
It is a paradox, yeah. But it aligns perfectly with her broader ideological framework, especially when we look at her economic strategy.
Right, which the press has quickly dubbed Sananomics.
Exactly.
Which obviously sounds like a direct sequel to Abenomics, the famous economic policies of her mentor, Shinzo Abe. But how does Sananomics actually differ in practice?
The crucial difference lies in the specific economic monster they're fighting. So Shinzo Abe spent years fighting deflation.
Inflation,
Yeah.
where prices are constantly falling.
Right. It sounds great for consumers on paper, but it's terrible for an economy because people stop buying things. I mean, why buy a refrigerator today if it's going to be cheaper next month?
Makes sense. The economy just stalls out.
Exactly. Takaichi, however, is fighting the exact opposite problem: cost-push inflation.
Let's break that down for the listener, because inflation can happen for a few reasons. Usually we think of inflation happening because the economy is running too hot. Like, everyone has money and they're all rushing out to buy things, which drives prices up.
That's demand pull inflation. But cost-push inflation is much more painful. It's driven not by high consumer demand, but by the soaring costs of the raw materials needed to make things.
Right.
And for Japan, this is highly exacerbated by a painfully weak yen.
Because Japan is an island nation with very few natural resources, they have to import almost everything: oil, food, Raw metals.
Almost everything.
So if the value of the yen drops, suddenly buying a barrel of oil from the Middle East costs twice as much in local currency,
Yeah.
and those costs get passed directly to the consumer at the grocery store or the gas pump.
Right. And to combat this crushing cost of living crisis, she's initiating what the policy papers call state-led growth activation.
What does that actually look like?
It's an incredibly aggressive fiscal stance. She is pushing a massive 14 trillion yen supplementary budget.
14 trillion. Wow.
Yeah. On top of that, she's abolishing the temporary gasoline tax to immediately lower fuel costs. She's raising the income tax exemption threshold to give workers more take-home pay and rolling out refundable tax credits for low-income households.
Okay, I have to jump in here because there is a glaring economic contradiction jumping out of these papers. How on earth can Japan afford to do this?
That's the million-dollar question.
They already have an immense, world record level national debt relative to the size of their economy. It feels like she's stepping as hard as she can on the gas pedal with all this expansive government spending.
She is.
But to keep that debt manageable, she has to wrestle with the Bank of Japan to keep the emergency brake off, essentially strong-arming them into delaying interest rate hikes.
That analogy is spot on, but it's actually even more precarious than that. Imagine that emergency brake is also connected to the steering wheel. If the Bank of Japan raises interest rates, it makes borrowing more expensive, which cools down inflation, but it also makes the government's massive debt payments skyrocket. Oh, wow. So they'd be crushed by their own debt interest.
Exactly. So Takaichi is heavily pressuring the central bank to keep nominal interest rates below the nominal growth rate.
Meaning she needs the economy to grow faster than the interest on the debt is growing.
Yes. And it has created severe tension between the Prime Minister and the Ministry of Finance. By pouring money into the economy and keeping rates artificially low, she is taking a massive, unprecedented fiscal risk.
What happens if she loses control of the steering wheel? What if that gamble fails?
Well, the speculation from financial analysts in our sources is pretty grim. It could lock Japan into a permanent cycle of debt-fueled smarting.
Because they can never raise the rates.
Right. Because interest rates stay low, the yen stays weak. And a persistently weak yen makes the cost of importing goods even higher, which ironically exacerbates the very cost-push inflation she's trying to solve in the first place.
It's a literal economic death spiral. She is walking a financial tightrope without a net.
A very thin tightrope. And that brings us directly back to that Oval Office meeting and why she was willing to sit quietly through that Pearl Harbor comment. Because beneath all the political theater and the awkward history lessons, there was a vital financial core to that visit.
There was. The diplomatic paperwork from that trip outlines a massive $73 billion investment package between the two nations.
$73 billion.
Yes, and the absolute crown jewel of that package is a $40 billion deal involving the U.S.-based energy giant GE Vernova and the Japan-based conglomerate Hitachi.
And what are they building?
They are partnering to build small modular nuclear reactors, or SMRs, in Tennessee and Alabama.
$40 billion for nuclear energy. Why is energy the absolute focal point of this bilateral relationship right now?
Because energy is Japan's ultimate Achilles heel. Japan currently imports roughly 95% of its oil from the Middle East.
95%.
Yeah. Therefore, the instability caused by the U.S.-Iran military conflict isn't just a distant foreign policy concern for Tokyo. It is a direct existential threat to Japan's entire economy.
Because if the oil from the Middle East stops flowing,
the lights in Tokyo go out, the manufacturing sector shuts down, period.
Which perfectly explains Takaichi's drastic domestic energy pivot. I mean, the policy papers indicate she's pushing for a rapid, aggressive revival of nuclear power within Japan itself. They're aiming to restart at least 17 dormant reactors by the year 2030.
And we cannot overstate what a monumental political shift that is.
Right, because of Fukushima.
Exactly. Remember, this is post-Fukushima Japan. After the 2011 earthquake and tsunami caused the meltdowns at the Fukushima Daiichi plant, the entire country was traumatized.
Understandably so.
They effectively shut down their entire nuclear grid and replaced it by importing massive amounts of liquefied natural gas and coal.
Wow.
For over a decade, nuclear energy was politically radioactive.
Literally and figuratively. But public sentiment is shifting now, not out of a sudden love for nuclear power, but out of sheer economic desperation.
Yes.
If you look at recent polling out of Tokyo from the materials, it shows 54% support for nuclear energy versus only 37% opposition.
That is a massive swing.
It is. That marks the very first Majority approval for nuclear power since the disaster in 2011.
The fear of economic collapse and energy starvation is now officially outweighing the trauma of Fukushima. And the reason they're investing so heavily in SMRs, small modular reactors, with the U.S. is because the technology has fundamentally changed.
Right. Let's clarify that for the listener for a second.
Hmm.
When we think of nuclear power plants, we usually picture these massive, sprawling concrete facilities with giant cooling towers.
The ones that take 20 years and $20 billion to build on-site.
Exactly.
SMRs are completely different. Think of traditional reactors, like old, giant mainframe computers that took up a whole room. And SMRs are like desktop PCs.
Oh, okay.
They are smaller, they can actually be manufactured in a factory setting, put on a truck, and shipped to a location.
That's incredible.
And furthermore, they use passive safety systems. Systems that rely on the laws of physics, like natural circulation and gravity, to shut down safely in an emergency.
Rather than relying on mechanical pumps that need electricity.
Exactly. Active mechanical pumps can fail during a power outage, which is exactly what caused the meltdown at Fukushima.
So Japan gets to test and refine this next-generation nuclear technology in Tennessee and Alabama in a favorable U.S. regulatory environment before potentially deploying it back home.
It's a massive step toward energy independence for them.
And this absolute, undeniable desperation for energy security links us to the main grievance Donald Trump aired during that Oval Office visit. Because before he brought up Pearl Harbor, he was complaining about a specific geographic bottleneck, the Strait of Hormuz.
Right. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow waterway between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. A staggering percentage of the world's oil passes through it daily.
And crucially, nearly all of Japan's Middle Eastern oil comes through that specific choke point.
Exactly. And Trump argued very vocally that U.S. allies, and he was directing a very pointed look at Japan here, were not, quote-unquote, stepping up to the plate to secure it.
His logic is pretty straightforward, right?
Mm-hmm.
If Japan relies so heavily on the oil passing through this waterway, why is the United States military bearing the entire financial and physical burden of patrolling it and keeping it open?
It's a fair question on its face.
Right. If Japan's entire economy relies on those oil tankers, why don't they just deploy the Japanese Navy to escort them?
And this brings us to the core of Japan's post-war identity and its current legal paralysis. Under the pacifist constitution imposed by the United States after World War II, specifically Article 9, Japan formally renounced war as a sovereign right.
Right. The self-defense forces.
Yes. Legally, the Japanese self-defense forces are strictly forbidden from using force except to defend their own immediate territory from direct attack.
Which means sending heavily armed warships to an active combat zone in the Middle East to potentially shoot at Iranian fast boats.
Yeah.
It faces completely insurmountable legal barriers.
Completely. Not to mention the massive domestic political backlash it would cause back in Tokyo.
So they basically can't go.
Well, they did offer some diplomatic cover. Japan signed a joint statement alongside 5 European nations condemning Iran's actions in the Strait and pledging to help stabilize global energy markets.
But as geopolitical strategists and the sources are quick to point out, strongly worded paper statements don't escort oil tankers through minefields.
No, they don't. Japan essentially wants the U.S. to continue playing the role of global bodyguard, keeping the sea lanes open, without Japan having to lift a finger militarily in the region.
It's like asking the local fire department to rush over and put out your neighbor's house fire because you are terrified the flames will eventually spread to your own roof.
Right.
But when the firefighters are stretched thin and ask you to just come over and help hold the hose, you flatly refuse, citing the bylaws of your homeowners association.
That's exactly what it looks like to Washington.
You want the protection, but you refuse the shared risk.
It is incredibly frustrating for Washington. But it also raises a deeper question about Japan's broader strategy. Because while Japan is legally restrained from acting in the Middle East, we have to look at what they are doing closer to home.
Right.
Under Prime Minister Takaichi, Japan is radically, fundamentally changing its military posture right in its own backyard.
Yes, the policy analysts refer to this new doctrine as controlled assertiveness.
Yes. Takaichi is aggressively pushing to raise Japan's defense spending to 2% of its GDP.
Which is huge. To give you context listening, for decades, Japan unofficially capped its defense spending at just 1%.
Right.
So doubling that budget turns Japan into one of the largest military spenders on the planet practically overnight.
It's a massive shift. Furthermore, she's planning the creation of a new centralized strategic intelligence agency modeled somewhat on Western intelligence services.
But the most controversial part of this controlled assertiveness is her push for the development of counterstrike capabilities. Let's explain what that actually means militarily.
Yeah, let's break that down.
For decades, Japan's military was purely a shield. They invested in Patriot missile batteries and Aegis destroyers designed to shoot down incoming missiles right before they hit Japanese soil.
The ultimate defense.
Right. Counterstrike capability means they are buying the sword. They are acquiring long-range cruise missiles like American-made Tomahawks that can reach out and destroy enemy launch sites deep inside foreign territory before those missiles are ever fired.
It is a profound shift from a purely defensive posture to an active deterrent posture.
Yeah.
And the primary target for this deterrence is no secret.
No.
Takaichi is widely described in the diplomatic cables as a renowned China hawk. She has explicitly stated that any conflict over Taiwan would constitute an existential crisis for Japan.
Because if you look at a map, Taiwan is part of the first island chain. If a hostile power takes Taiwan, they effectively control the vital shipping lanes that lead directly to Japan's southern islands.
It would strangle Japan geographically.
And her direct rhetoric regarding Taiwan is a massive departure from the quiet, ambiguous diplomacy Japan usually employs regarding Beijing.
Oh, it's a huge departure.
And it has clearly struck a nerve because it triggered a vicious, highly undiplomatic response from Chinese officials. There was a highly publicized incident in the reports where a Chinese consul general located in Osaka publicly threatened to, quote, cut off the dirty head of the Japanese prime minister.
Yeah, that is genuinely shocking language from an official diplomat.
You usually expect veiled threats or economic warnings, not literal threats of decapitation.
It illustrates just how high the temperature is in the region right now.
Which brings up a really terrifying strategic thought. With China openly threatening the Japanese prime minister and constantly launching massive, rehearsed military blockade exercises around Taiwan, how does Takaichi feel about Trump taking U.S. military assets out of the Pacific to go fight a sprawling war against Iran in the Middle East?
You have just outlined Takaichi's ultimate nightmare scenario.
Yeah.
Yes. If you connect the strategic dots, just as the deterrence problem in East Asia reaches its absolute boiling point, her primary protector, the United States military, gets bogged down in another endless conflict in the Middle East.
Right.
If American carriers and aircraft are diverted to the Persian Gulf, it effectively removes the most vital check against China's growing power in the Pacific.
It creates a massive vacuum. And that is exactly why she is pushing so hard for this controlled assertiveness and the counterstrike missiles.
Exactly. She realizes the era of outsourcing Japan's defense is ending. Japan has to become a full-fledged security actor. They can't just be a junior partner hiding behind Washington's shield anymore because Washington might be distracted elsewhere when the real crisis hits.
That realization is driving her entire foreign policy. And she isn't just looking to build up the domestic military. She's aggressively looking for new strategic friendships to balance the geopolitical scales.
Which brings us to Japan's expanding diplomatic reach deep into the Eurasian continent, specifically Central Asia, through a diplomatic framework known as C5 plus Japan.
Okay, Central Asia. So we are talking about nations like Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan. Historically, that has been Russia's backyard, and more recently, China's economic playground. What is Japan doing there?
They're stepping in to offer a viable alternative. For the last decade, China has dominated investment in this region through its massive Belt and Road Initiative, building highways, railways, and pipelines.
Right.
But many of those countries are now wary of the heavy debt loads and political strings attached to Chinese money. Japan is offering a different model. The diplomatic strategy outlines a focus on high-quality, transparent infrastructure projects, heavy investments in hydrogen energy production, and digital connectivity.
So instead of just trying to extract resources, Japan is trying to build sustainable partnerships.
Exactly. Japan wants to position itself as a reliable, rules-based bridge between the technological West and the resource-rich East.
That's smart.
If they can secure supply chains for rare earth minerals and uranium from Central Asia, they can slowly reduce their crushing reliance on the Middle East and China.
It's a brilliant, long-term strategic play for resources and geopolitical influence. But as I read through the economic analyses of Takaichi's grand plan, I noticed another glaring, almost fatal domestic contradiction.
Let's hear it.
She wants rapid, state-led economic growth. She wants to double defense spending. She wants global supply chain dominance and technological superiority. But Japan has a famously severe demographic crisis.
They do.
The population is rapidly aging and shrinking. The workforce is literally disappearing. Yet, at the exact same time, Takaichi is aggressively cracking down on immigration.
It is the most profound paradox of her entire administration.
It's like trying to scale a massive, ambitious tech startup to take over the global market, but enforcing a strict company rule that you will only ever hire people who are born in your specific hometown.
Yeah.
You want global dominance, but you're starving yourself of the actual human capital needed to build it. How does that compute?
To her conservative base, it computes perfectly. But economically, it's highly perilous. The demographic dilemma is perhaps her greatest vulnerability.
So what exactly are the new rules?
Well, the domestic policy papers detail her highly restrictive immigration approach. She is implementing much tighter visa monitoring, introducing strict sector-specific quotas to heavily limit the inflow of foreign workers, and placing a rigid emphasis on ensuring that any migrants who do enter perfectly conform to traditional Japanese cultural norms.
Why are they so resistant to opening the doors? I mean, most Western nations solve their labor shortages through immigration.
Because for Japanese conservatives, social harmony and cultural homogeneity are viewed as the bedrock of their national strength. They look at the social friction, political polarization, and integration challenges happening in Western Europe and the United States, and they view mass immigration as a destabilizing force. They would literally rather suffer economic contraction than risk cultural dilution.
But the risk to her specific economic plan is obvious.
The risk is immense. The financial analyses point out that by tightening these rules, she's actively alienating the very skilled migrant labor force, engineers, healthcare workers, construction crews, that Japan urgently needs just to keep its basic economy functioning.
Let alone to achieve the massive debt-fueled growth targets of Sananomics.
Exactly.
It's a fascinating high-wire balancing act between preserving an idealized national identity and facing cold, hard economic reality. And speaking of national identity, I want to bring our narrative full circle back to that incredible Oval Office moment and examine how history, specifically the legacy of World War II, is continually weaponized as a diplomatic cudgel.
It really is a recurring theme in modern statecraft.
Yeah.
Look at Trump's flippant, unscripted remark to Takaichi about Pearl Harbor. He used historical trauma to justify keeping an ally in the dark and to assert dominance in the room.
Right.
Contrast that with the events of 2016, where we saw a deeply somber, highly respectful joint visit to the Pearl Harbor Memorial by former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and U.S. President Barack Obama.
Right, a totally different tone.
It shows how the exact same historical event can be utilized to heal a geopolitical rift, or casually thrown like a grenade to assert leverage.
And it isn't an isolated tactic for the U.S. administration either. When reading through the diplomatic history and the sources, there's a noted incident where President Trump, during a tense negotiation regarding trade and defense spending, told the German chancellor that D-Day was not a pleasant day for you.
Right. He views historical guilt as a point of leverage. But we must also note that the weaponization of history is certainly not exclusive to the American side of this relationship.
No, not at all.
Prime Minister Takaichi herself engages heavily in her own form of historical revisionism to appeal to her nationalist base.
Right. She has made highly controversial, highly publicized visits to the Yasukuni Shrine in Tokyo.
Which is a huge flashpoint.
Exactly. For those unfamiliar, Yasukuni is a Shinto shrine that honors millions of Japan's war dead. But the controversy stems from the fact that the enshrined souls include 14 Class A war criminals convicted by the Allied tribunals after World War II.
So whenever a Japanese prime minister visits that shrine, it instantly triggers diplomatic fury from China and South Korea, who obviously suffered under Japanese occupation.
Right. It's seen as an unapologetic endorsement of Japan's imperial past. Furthermore, Takaichi has publicly claimed that Japan fought a defensive war in the 1930s and 40s.
A war for its own survival against Western embargoes, in her view.
Exactly. And she has repeatedly asserted that Japan has apologized far too much to other Asian nations for its past actions. She essentially suffers from profound apology fatigue.
Which creates this incredible, almost tragic irony that you just have to step back and marvel at.
Yeah.
You have two deeply nationalist leaders sitting in the Oval Office. Both of them actively utilize highly tailored, heavily revised versions of their own nation's histories to project strength and unyielding pride to their domestic political bases.
Right.
Yet they are forced to sit next to each other, swallow their pride, force a smile, and engage in this deeply awkward marriage of convenience.
Because the modern realities of energy needs, supply chain vulnerabilities, and looming geopolitical threats from adversaries like China and Iran simply leave them no other choice.
They're bound together by sheer necessity, even as their nationalist instincts constantly push them to needle and provoke each other.
So, to summarize the unbelievable balancing act Prime Minister Takaichi is performing for you listening, she is smiling through direct historical insults in Washington to secure the nuclear technology and the Middle Eastern oil her country needs to survive.
Yeah.
She is fueling massive debt-driven economic spending at home while simultaneously wrestling the central bank to fight off inflation.
Right.
And she is attempting to project formidable counterstrike military strength abroad to deter China while wrestling with a rapidly aging population and strictly closed borders at home.
It is a transformation defined by massive contradictions, but looking at all these pieces on the board leads us to a final, very provocative concept derived from these analyses, something for you to mull over as you watch these global events continue to unfold.
The ultimate geopolitical question: what happens if she actually succeeds?
Yes. If Takaichi is successful in her grand strategy, if she actually manages to revise Article 9 and unshackle the Japanese military from its pacifist constraints,
Okay.
if she successfully builds a formidable domestic defense and aerospace industry, if she secures robust alternative energy pipelines and critical minerals from Central Asia, and if she utilizes next-generation nuclear technology to make Japan fully self-sufficient and technologically sovereign.
Will Japan eventually outgrow its need for the United States entirely?
Exactly.
It changes the entire power dynamic of the Pacific. By constantly demanding that allies like Japan, step up to the plate, pay their own way, and handle their own security, is the America First doctrine inadvertently engineering a future where the United States loses its most crucial strategic foothold in the Indo-Pacific.
It's the great strategic blind spot of demanding total self-reliance from your allies. Once they build their own armor and no longer need you to be their bodyguard, they no longer have to tolerate your demands, your trade tariffs, or your insults.
And suddenly, the company doesn't need the merger anymore, and they walk away from the table.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for joining us on this exploration today. We hope this has given you a much clearer lens through which to view these incredible